Welcome to the last lesson in section 2 in this course on visuals. Today we'll be talking about combo charts. So as I mentioned in the last lesson, a combo chart is basically one chart on top of another chart. It's a combination of charts, hence combo charts. Now as long as you have some kind of chart with an x and y axis, you can put another chart on top of it. You can put a line graph on top of a column chart. You can put an area chart on top of a line graph. Now obviously you can't put something like a pie chart on top of a line graph because a pie chart doesn't have an x and y axis. But other than that, you can pretty much put as many charts as you want. I'm sure there's some kind of limit in there, but like most things with Excel, it gives you a lot more than you need. And quite honestly, the more charts you put on top of each other, the more muddied it looks. I remember seeing one line graph, there was probably 67 different data series on it, and it became unrecognizable. So it's okay to put a couple of charts on top of each other so you can see some kind of pattern, but once you get past a certain point, it just becomes ridiculous. So use your own discretion. So for this one, we're going to chart out our orders and our returns. Now we don't have a returns column in our data series, so let's go ahead and make one. Let's say that maybe some people, they return their products because they got damaged during shipment, or maybe they already had too many, they need to return some. So let's make a returns column. Go back to our unclean data. Let's go and insert another column right here. Let's go to the top, call this returns. And let's go ahead and hide some of these columns. There we go. Alright, so now we have our orders and we have our returns. So for this one, I believe the maximum number is 50 for the returns and the minimum is 1. So let's do this. Instead of just making a random between formula, I don't want it to be just any number, because like this one down here, if it's a 1, I don't want the returns to be a 3 or 4, because that doesn't make sense. You know, they bought one item, then later on they returned 3. Now I understand that a returns column doesn't really make sense in the same data set as the orders, because it's not like they can order it and then immediately return it within the same day. But for the purpose of this course, let's just pretend like this returns column was maybe in a different data sheet and you did the math. But just for ease of use, let's go ahead and put it in this column right here. Let's go ahead and do this just for the purpose of graphing. So it's got to be a fewer amount of returns. And probably it's not going to be nearly as much as the number of orders. Let's make it considerably less. Let's say equals if, so we're going to say if this column to the left is greater than, let's say 40. So if that's true, if this column or the one next to it is greater than 40, then let's do a ran between, say 4 and 5. If it's false, we're going to put another if formula. So first it looks over here, it says, okay, is this greater than 40? And if so, then do this ran, but it says nope, that condition is not met. So then it's going to say, okay, if it's false, then check and see if this is greater than, let's say 30. So anytime you're doing a nested formula with ifs, which ifs is actually really good at making a lot of nested formulas, because you can say, well, if this is true, well, if not, then if you have multiple conditions, you can say, okay, well, if that's not met, then do another if within the false statement. So we have this if formula. So this is your logical test. That's greater than 40. If it's true, then do this ran between. And the third and final argument is false. But you can plug in yet another if formula within this same formula. And you can do this many, many times. Like I said before, with Excel, you can do quite a few if statements within this one cell. I think it does have a limit. I think it's within the 50s or 60s or something like that. That's 50 or 60 different if statements within the same cell. I don't know the exact number. I do know there is one, but it's so many that you're just never going to use it. I think the most I've done is maybe 8 or 9 if statements in the same formula, and that was still pretty extensive, but it's nowhere close to what you could actually do. So you have plenty of space to work with in your nested formulas. Alright, so third argument put an if statement here. So if it's greater than 40, ran between 4 and 5. If not, then if it's greater than 30, then ran between, say, 3 and 4. And then if it's false, then if, yet again, this is greater than, say, 20, then ran between 2 and 3. And we're going to leave it right there. If it's less than 20, we'll just leave it be. I'm going to close that if statement, then I'm going to close that if statement, and then I'll close that if statement. So anytime you're putting multiple if statements in there, just remember that the next if statement goes in the false argument. Now always remember to do this from highest number, if it's something like this, to lowest number. Because if you did it in the opposite order, think about how that would work. So if the very first one was if the number of orders is greater than 20, it would look at this and say, nope, it's not met. And then it would look at all the other ones and say, nope, none of them are met, go on to the next one. But let's just say this was, let's say, 30 instead of 13. Let's say it was 30, 0. If it was in reverse order, it would say, okay, is this greater than 20? It would say 30, 0, and say, yes, it is greater than 20. So it ran between 2 and 3. And it would never end up getting to this 30. So the order is important. So if this is greater than this, then just be sure you have the order right. All right, so now we have that. Let's go enter. So now we have a lot of false ones, which I forgot to take into account. Over 1. So in this one right here, value of false, because I didn't put a false statement here, I just closed it. Let's put comma, then let's say 0, and enter. So basically, if it's anything under 20, it should just give me a 0, which is doing right there just fine. So that's good. Over 45, so it gives me a ran between 4 and 5, so that's 4, so that's good. Alright, so it looks like it's working just fine. So now we have a returns column. Let's go back to our end sheet. I'll press Control page down, 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 down. There we go. So now we can do our sum if formulas and then do a combo chart. Let's say equals sum if tab. The range is actually the salesperson because I'll be doing it based on the salesperson. That'll be order table, then salesperson. There we go. Criteria is the one to the left. And like before, I'll go ahead and lock that column. So when I copy over, it's not going to shift anything. Sum, now there it is, the sum range. That's the order table. That will be the number of orders. Like that, and enter. There we go. Go ahead and double click. Now for the returns, it'll be very much the same. Go ahead and copy that. Control V for paste. Press escape to get out of that. But I'm just going to change it just slightly. Instead of looking at that number of orders, it'll actually be the returns. And enter. So as predicted, it is significantly less, going from 2,000 to 200. Alright, so now we have our data. Let's go ahead and make a combo chart. So first, let's go ahead and select this. I'm going to go to Insert. You can either go to Recommended Chart, or probably just give you a clustered column, or you can go to your column chart selection here. You can do the same thing. I'll just insert this. Make this a little bit smaller. There we go. Just put orders and returns. There we go. Alright, so now what I can do, I can just either drag this data over, or I can go to select data, and then select it from there. So I'm just going to drag over here. Oh, sorry. There we go, drag down, there we go. Now it's still going to graph it as a clustered column chart, but instead Let's go to chart type. You can do that, or you can do like what we did before with a stacked column chart. But let's do a combo chart. And automatically, it kind of knows where I'm going. I'm going to graph it as a line graph. Then I'm going to put it on the secondary axis, because on the primary axis, the first one, it's going to consider these numbers on the same plane. But on the secondary axis, it's going to move it up a little bit. It's going to make it look a little bit more pretty. There we go. So now you can kind of see a trend emerging. Let's go and press OK. There we go. Look at that. So let me go ahead and organize this. Let me filter, custom sort. I'm going to sort it by the orders, smallest to largest. There we go. Press OK. So now it starts at the smallest and it goes up. And you can see that the number of returns is dependent on how many orders there are. So it's not really dependent on the salesperson per se. It's dependent on how many orders there are. Now it's not completely perfect, because you can tell, some of these, the line is a little bit closer to the top, like with Jim, and with Creed is a little bit lower. But overall, it does look like it's pretty similar. That's because of our ran between formula. We did it based on how many orders there were. So that makes more sense. And in other data sets that you'll be working with, you will see more trends like that. It's not going to necessarily be perfect, but it does give you some insight. You say, okay, so I guess the more orders there are, the more returns there are going to be. Just the likelihood of products breaking during transit or something like that. Maybe Michael Scott has a return policy, no questions asked, so even if it breaks, you return it, they'll give you a new one. Like I said, you can just add more and more data sets to this graph, and you can put charts on top of other charts. You just go to your chart, you go to your chart type, then you can just adjust however you want to see this. So maybe instead of a line graph, you can do maybe an area chart. You can see it like this, how it's kind of in the background like this. Or you can make this into a stacked line with markers or whatever. Typically, I like to have the column chart and then a line graph, just so you can easily see the trend. Now with a bar chart, I don't think it's going to let you do a bar. Well, it will, but it really doesn't make much sense, because now you have two different axes. You have one set of data that's being graphed this way if it's higher, and then you have one set of data that's being graphed on the y-axis, up and down, the vertical one. So this one really doesn't make much sense. So what I would do, I'd probably stick with the clustered column chart, because you think, okay, up is good and down is bad. That's about all the options it'll give you. You do have some more. But like I said, this really doesn't make much sense. You can do it, but it doesn't really show you what's happening in your data by the salesperson. So yeah, you can do it. You can do something like a pie chart, but it really doesn't make much sense. So that's probably why this is closer to the bottom. Now keep in mind, with visuals, the whole point of a visual is to make it make more sense. The whole point is to be able to look at a graph and instantly know what's going on. So if you look at a graph and you're struggling to see what's going on, and you think, okay, I think this represents this, then it's not a good graph. You need to rethink your data, restructure it. Now, of course, you as the person analyzing your data, you're going to be the one who knows it best. So even if it makes sense to you, go ahead and grab a colleague and say, hey, does this graph make sense to you? Because it might make sense to you, but you're the one who graphed it. So of course it's going to make sense. But if it doesn't make sense to someone else, it might not make sense to your boss as well. So make your data easy to read. So make it simple and make it clear. Hope you've enjoyed this section. I look forward to seeing you in section 3, our final section on pivot tables.